It's the Pittsburgh Steelers. They're up next. What a weird season the Steelers had, right? They got to 10 wins pretty quickly. Looked like things were different. Looked like this wasn't just Mike Tomlin sneak by and be over 500 type of team. This was a contender. They were good on defense. They were more explosive on offense once Russell Wilson took over, but it all fell apart once they faced all the good teams down the stretch, and including the playoff game against Baltimore. So interesting times in Pittsburgh, right? I think they've made QB moves last year that in the short term were fascinating. They barely spent anything for Russell Wilson and for Justin Fields. I think theoretically it worked. It got them to 10 wins in a playoff berth. But you may have mentioned this when we broke it all down. The ceiling was low, right? The ceiling is low when you make those moves. And we saw that. They hit a ceiling when they're trying to compete with the best teams in the NFL. So Pittsburgh has to solve this quarterback situation first, and then everything else around it, another solid roster for the Steelers.
Yeah, it really is. QB's the question again. I mean, is this a team in the Aaron Rodgers? Is this a team where Aaron Rodgers actually makes sense? And because there aren't that many of them,
I've been on the strong no for Aaron Rodgers bandwagon. I would say of all the teams, though,
generally, or just specifically to the Steelers?
No, generally, because most of the QB needy teams are in rebuild mode, right? And most of them, it's like we're resetting the culture with the Raiders and we're resetting with Tennessee, and I don't like any of those fits. My thing with Rodgers is if he's going to go somewhere, he's got to play under a head coach and an offensive coordinator, especially an offensive coordinator that he didn't choose, and he's going to have to buy into whatever that system is. So of all the places, is this Mike Tomlin superpower that he can get Aaron Rodgers to come in and just be a Pittsburgh Steeler for a year and do it their way? And now at the end of the day, does that feel like another Russell Wilson move, right? Like picture this season playing out. There's some games where like Rodgers has a big game and him and George Pickens are firing and all this stuff. But then there's other games where it's like, oh, the man's, in his 40s and looks like it. And we've actually hit a ceiling here. Like I could see that playing out exactly the same way. But if it's a buy low, it would be it'd be a buy low. It's not going to be a big investment in Rodgers financially. So like theoretically it could work again, get you to 9 or 10 wins and a playoff push. But are you beating the Ravens? Are you beating the Bills? Are you beating the Chiefs? Probably not.
Well, it's interesting because we're starting now to get a little bit of pushback all the way through the season. Remember, everyone was just trashing Rodgers, particularly the shouty shows, right? We're just like every week, like Rodgers is garbage. He's done. He's washed. He's got to quit. All this stuff, right? And we were sort of saying all the way through, okay, obviously this isn't going well, right? They're losing games. It doesn't look good. The offense is a mess. On a throw-by-throw basis, though, Rodgers is not playing that badly. Like, we are not looking at a guy who's just completely imploding and is terrible. And, it's not like final year Peyton Manning where he was awful. And, like, there was very little discernible difference between Peyton Manning and Brock Osweiler the year that Peyton Manning actually won his Super Bowl and got to ride off into the sunset. Like, Manning was done and yet somehow crawled over the line because the Denver Broncos had one of the best defenses in NFL history that year. We weren't looking at that with Aaron Rodgers last year, despite coming off an Achilles injury at 40 plus years of age. So I think now you're starting to see this little pushback in this offseason that I think will grow as it goes from people making that point now. It's like, hey, Rodgers actually didn't play that badly. And if you look at his numbers and, he's actually... his numbers and Josh Allen's numbers aren't that far apart from each other and blah, 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 right?
But they are. I mean, if you just look at touchdown to interception ratio, maybe. But
correct.
That's not
I'm not saying
reality.
I'm not saying the argument is sound. I'm saying what you're hearing now is a little bit of pushback in that direction. So I think now you're going to get this growing sentiment over the offseason that actually there is a pretty good season still in Aaron Rodgers and maybe a year or two. Tom Brady's got 5-6 more years in him. But maybe, people are going to look at this and say, actually, there is a year or two of solid Aaron Rodgers play, and not just solid, good Aaron Rodgers play still in there. And I think that's true. The big question, though, last year was, well, if he's not playing badly on a throw-to-throw basis, and yet it still looks worse than it did with Zach Wilson there, what's happening, right? How much of this is Rodgers is just such a bummer that he's down, like bringing everyone down? How much of it is this idea of when he just does what he wants, so the offense isn't anywhere near as efficient as it should be. Like, it's the other stuff that was the problem. So if you bring in Aaron Rodgers and you pair him with Mike Tomlin, not that Tomlin is the offensive coach, but like a guy that's a strong-willed leader of men in Pittsburgh, right? If Rodgers is willing to be coached in a way he was coached with or by Matt LaFleur, right, where he came in and said, look, I don't care what you want to run. This is what I need you to run because this is the way we get the best version of you on the field. And there were some teething problems there, but eventually they got on the same page and it was great. If Tomlin is able to do that to Rodgers, right, go head-to-head with him, win the battle of wills, and basically get Rodgers to do what Rodgers needs to do, then I think it could actually produce really good results, like better results than Russell Wilson was able to produce within this offense. But I think that's a massive gamble. Like, that's I am putting my job on the line gamble from Mike Tomlin. Now, you know, he talks himself up a lot, right? Like, this is why I get paid the big money, making calls like that. That would be a hell of a ballsy decision because I think if it didn't go well, it would cost him his job.
I would have concerns about it working for various reasons, right? I mean, we've talked about the throw-for-throw thing with Rodgers, but most advanced metrics have him as horrible last year. PFF has him a little bit higher. I think part of that is, again, he's not getting blamed from a PFF perspective for like the entire scheme, which I think he actually gets some blame for, right? Now, the other thing is, you're right. I've said, hey, you go get coached like you did with Matt LaFleur. Matt LaFleur, though, I think we've realized is one of the better play callers in the NFL.
Sure.
We're going to go get coached by Arthur Smith, who doesn't necessarily have a history of elevating his quarterback, his passing game. So I don't know, man. I look, this is just the situation that they're in. They have to draft somebody this year, regardless. Like, you have to have some sort of eye to the future. If you're the Steelers, I'm not saying they have to go Jackson Dart in the first, like we saw from Field Yates mock a couple weeks ago. They have to draft somebody. So I think they're going second wave quarterback before they play in the Rodgers sweepstakes. I'm making the call for Matthew Stafford. We saw those rumors out there. Like, would I give up a 1 for Stafford for 2 years? I might do it if I'm Pittsburgh to continue to, it's like playing the Saints salary cap game, continue to just push it down the line when I need to solve this thing. I'm at least making the call for Stafford. I don't think it's going to happen. But of all the teams where Rodgers could land, this is the one I think I could stomach the most, which would be the Steelers.
So, okay, first question. If you called up the Rams and said, we're willing to offer you pick number 21 straight up for Matthew Stafford, do the Rams say yes?
It's the closest they are to saying yes. I still think they might say no.
You
made a great point on the NFC West show. Like, why do they opt in?
If I'm the Rams, I wouldn't do that.
Yeah, like if every team that we struggle to fix, it's like, what do we do at quarterback? Why would the Rams opt into that? Other than being forward thinking and saying, well, we're going to either let Stafford run out his contract in a couple of years, or we can get this first round draft pick. And that will be a better long-term play for us. But I do think they're still in this kind of window where Stafford can go out there and win, and they could make a bit of a run with him.
But I'm not even sure that it's obviously a better situation to have an extra first round draft pick at the point where you don't have a quarterback, but you're accelerating the point where you don't have a quarterback. So it evens out at best. And actually, I think it probably is a net loss because you took away a chance of winning a championship, right? So I wouldn't do it if I'm the Rams. Now, I don't know that means they won't, but so my point being, to me, that's not happening, right? So then you get 3 options if you are Pittsburgh, GM Pittsburgh. Number 1, you put all the chips in the middle for the Aaron Rodgers gamble. Number 2, you're drafting Jackson Dart or whoever your favorite QB3 is at 21 overall, and that guy's starting day 1. Or number 3, we're re-signing Justin Fields and we're giving that a shot again. Which is your favorite?
I'm going to re-sign Justin Fields and draft somebody. Oh, man. That's it.
That's who your Fields is your option.
Yeah.
Okay.
You want Rodgers?
I mean, I'm not gambling with my job. I'm gambling with Tomlin's job. So if I'm gambling with somebody else's job, yeah, I want Aaron Rodgers. If I'm gambling with my own job, then no, I'm probably re-signing Fields and grabbing somebody in the draft.
The biggest issue here is not so much 2025. I think it's 26 and beyond, right? I don't think the Steelers want to be in the situation where they're guessing about quarterback again. It's why we say a lot, like, did they miss on Kenny Pickett? Yes. Could you make the argument that they could have drafted him in the second or third round? Sure. But you still have to take those chances, right? Like, not if they added, we had this discussion a few weeks ago. If they just had Trent McDuffie on this team, the guy that picked right after Kenny Pickett, if they just had Trent McDuffie on this team, they still don't have a quarterback. They still don't have anything solved. So the idea that they, quote, wasted pick 21 or whatever on Kenny Pickett a couple of years ago, it's not a huge deal, really, because they needed to take a shot and see. And if Kenny Pickett was the guy, the payoff would be, massive compared to Trent McDuffie or whoever else you could take. So they got to take shots on quarterback. I think this is a draft to at least get somebody else in the building. And Fields might be the best bridge quarterback because we've at least seen him with Arthur Smith. There were signs of improvement, his ability to just kind of get rid of the ball a little bit quicker, hit his first read, throw the ball a little bit more accurately. They were 4-2 with him. They leaned into his running a little bit. There's something there, but you're still trying to have that eye toward the future. So you have to draft somebody second round or later.
Yeah, I mean, the mistake was not drafting Kenny Pickett with their first round draft pick. The mistake was putting themselves in a position where they needed to make that happen. I know people had said when we brought this up before, it's like, well, they drafted Mason Rudolph, right? But okay, yes, he was a guy that a lot of people liked reasonably highly in that draft, but he went in the third round. That, generally speaking, a third
round. That was 4 years prior, though. Like, you have to do that every year, right? When you're trying to move on from a Big Ben at some point, you have to draft the third or fourth round quarterback every year, hoping that somewhere there's a Russell Wilson or a Brock Purdy or whoever that actually takes over at some point.
And the reason you have to do that is because, generally speaking, a third round pick on quarterback is not a serious investment. Like, it's hey, if this guy turns out great, fantastic, but we're not expecting it, right? Like, Kellen Mond is a third round draft pick, which made sense at the time, but like, Kellen Mond had almost zero chance of actually becoming the guy and taking over it, So yeah, they did at one point think, what the hell? We kind of liked Mason Rudolph. Let's spend a third round draft pick on him. But that was not like a serious succession plan to Ben Roethlisberger. And the lack of a serious succession plan to Ben Roethlisberger was the problem that eventually put them in a position of needing to draft Kenny Pickett in the first round in a draft where it doesn't look like that should have happened. Here's a question for you, though. And this wouldn't necessarily shape our fixing of the team, but how much pressure do you think Mike Tomlin is actually under this season? Because, again, they had their standard season of good, not a losing record, but people are getting pissed off that they're not going to win a playoff game. They're almost the Dallas Cowboys, except without the 12-win succession thing of, like, you can get good, you can get into the playoffs maybe, and that's it. We're no closer to actually winning in the playoffs, and people are tiring of that the way they tired of it with Mike Shanahan back in the day, where it's like, hey, this succession of really good seasons is great, but when was the last time you actually won a championship? Get out of here.
Man, your comparison to the Cowboys actually isn't a bad one. Like, the difference is that in 2008, Mike Tomlin won a Super Bowl.
Right.
And if that didn't happen, which it did, if that didn't happen, where's the tolerance for being a good but not really competitive playoff team? Because they're getting whooped in the playoffs. Like, they're getting outscored by like 1 million in the first half over their last 5 games or whatever it is. The analyst in me says the quarterback's the biggest driver of all of this stuff, though, and the fact that we're still sitting here debating 41 or 40 whatever he is, 40-year-old Aaron Rodgers or year 5 of Justin Fields, the fact that we're still debating that stuff is the thing I would defend Tomlin with, right? Which is like, the head coach can only do so much. There's only a handful of head coaches that really win with multiple quarterbacks. And even the great Bill Belichick was not well under 500 without Tom Brady. Like, that's just the reality of the NFL. And so with Big Ben, Tomlin can compete for championships. Without Big Ben, it's kind of a minor miracle that they've never had a loser, that they continue to be that good, right? So it's almost like I almost like want to see him with that next opportunity with a good enough quarterback, but I completely get the idea that change for change's sake might need to happen just to try to get the Steelers, onto the next era, so to speak. How's that?
The Mike Shanahan comp is interesting to me because I mean Shanahan's Super Bowls were what 98 and 9, and then they fired him at like 06, something like that. You're
90,
getting a
yeah, 97,
you're,
98, and then he like stitched it together with Brian Greasy post John
yeah,
Elway, and
but
then Jay Cutler right at the end.
you're getting an actual number on how much credit in the bank a ring gets you, right? Like you get a Super Bowl, that's great. You're now untouchable for like X years. We're getting X. We're getting a figure on what X is based off Mike Shanahan, Mike Tomlin. Now Tomlin's in Pittsburgh, so you get even longer. You get X plus 1.5 or whatever based off it being the Steelers, and they don't like to make moves. But like this is how like the credit is gone for Tomlin now. Great, you won a championship. You're undeniably a great coach, but the credit is all evaporated now, and we are like the fan base. I think is fairly fed up of only being good, not being great.
And you're in this world where you need to be great to compete with the Ravens, who have a great quarterback and a great organization, to compete with the Bills, to compete with the Chiefs, right? I mean, that's what you're trying to do, and it's been multiple years of them clearly the Steelers being a step below that group. So we can't solve Mike Tomlin. We can't solve head coach. What else can we do? Honestly, I'm not inspired whether it's Aaron Rodgers or Justin Fields. I think the answer at quarterback is like take some swings, right? Draft 2. Take swings there. What else from a roster perspective do we need to focus on for Pittsburgh?
They need a left tackle. I mean, Dan Moore Jr. has been their left tackle for years, and
No,
they've never been happy with it.
Fautano is going to play left tackle.
Okay, so that's our answer at left tackle.
Fautano at left. I know it looks like they might be losing starters on the offensive line, but Mason McCormick was a rookie last year and stepped in. He'll probably play right guard for James Daniels. Fautano probably at left tackle. So I think they've got 5 starters on the offensive line. The only question is if you're like already ready to maybe move on from Broderick Jones at right tackle, but I think it's still too early probably for that. So I think they've got 5 starters up front.
I mean, I don't know that it is too early to start thinking about moving on from Broderick Jones. I would definitely add a tackle.
Bring in competition like a Morgan Moses. No, bring in competition. Sorry, I just had to help you there because I know which depth chart you're looking at here, and I think
you're right. But
it's improperly sorted right now.
But given that we don't know if Fautano is going to be good and Broderick Jones doesn't look good at the moment, I would absolutely add a tackle to that mix.
Yes. Yeah.
And whether that's your Morgan Moses counter, whether that's Jedrick Wills reclamation, kick the tires project, whether that's a more serious swing at it and you bring in a Cam Robinson, which allows you to keep Fautano on the other side and beat out Broderick Jones, like those two go toe to toe as opposed to asking them to be your 2 starters. I would definitely be adding a tackle of some description. And honestly, if I'm adding a starter, I'm not sad about it.
And then I think the receiving core, we have a ton of questions. I think George Pickens has been such a fascinating player because in some weeks it's like, yeah, this dude's a wide receiver 1, and other weeks not so much. You've got he's fighting people, he's doing all this stuff, and it just feels like a ticking time bomb, like every good Steelers receiver under Tomlin. So I don't know what you end up wanting to do with that, right? Do you feel like you can say, hey, Pickens is our 1, just get him, a speed guy opposite him, get him more consistent options next to him? I mean, it was him and Van Jefferson as the 2 last year because of some injuries and Deontay Johnson moving on. Either way, I think the entire receiving core needs to be addressed.
Yeah, because we don't know what Roman Wilson is yet, right? Like he was their 3rd round draft pick last year who basically didn't play at all. So we don't know if he's just a potential slot competition for Calvin Austin or if he's like a real viable potential number 2 opposite George Pickens. That could change. And maybe at this point you can't rely on him either way. So you got to go back to the well and draft a guy. But yeah, I think offensive line, offensive tackle depth, whether it's starter or a backup competition, wide receiver depth and or starters. I think those are the 2 biggest areas of need.
Yeah, absolutely. They have a lot of draft capital. And so, I mean, I think Omar Khan as GM, I think overall has done a good job with most of the roster. And, that's how I evaluate my GMs, man. It's like all the non-QB moves. How well can you create the infrastructure? but at some point you got to make the right QB move. And so I think it's they have to use. I mean, I might draft 2 quarterbacks with all the draft picks that they have. Just get 2 of the Dylan Gabriels and Jackson Darts of the world in the building, and hope that you can hit on one of those guys there. But I
mean, what would you go? Where would you go with 21 if? So it's either Jackson Dart effectively or something else. Like Dart would be the only quarterback you would think about drafting at that spot, right?
Yeah, I think I'd rather go best player available there, and then where are they in the second? 53, 85. Probably go second round quarterback and like 4th round quarterback. Go Dylan Gabriel and Will Howard. Just get one of those guys in. And I think and look, this is me drafting quarterbacks. I don't think our opinions matter a whole lot. I don't think anybody's great at evaluating quarterbacks. So you take shots on the guys you think are the best, but take multiple swings at it with all the draft capital that they have. I would get 2 of those. Get Will Howard, Dylan Gabriel, and Justin Fields competing this year. That's what I'm doing if I'm Pittsburgh. Like you have to be outside the box thinking, I think, if you're the Steelers right now, in how to solve this quarterback situation. And I think they did that last year. That was outside the box thinking. Like nobody was yearning to get Russell Wilson in the building to get them a Super Bowl, but there was a chance that he could hit a ceiling and get there. And Justin Fields, as a reclamation former first rounder, there's a chance he could get there. That's good outside the box thinking, but it's a 1 year. I thought it was a good move. Do something like that again. Justin Fields plus now 2 draft picks, right? You're uncovering every stone to try to find the next franchise quarterback.
It was great business. It was sound process, but it was almost always likely to be a short-term solution to the problem.
Yes.
And that's fine. But now you're back in the situation where you need another solution to the problem, short or long-term. So I don't think it's a reflection on what they did last year that they're back here again, other than simply, again, these are all the root of this problem is half a decade ago. It's not last year, right? It's the fact that the succession plan to Roethlisberger was bad, and they're still dealing with that because they hadn't fixed it. And last year, I think, like last year's moves exist in isolation. They were good moves at the time. They were shrewd business. It was a good gamble to take, but it was almost always going to be just for last year. So the problems now are the consequences of years ago.
All right, man. I don't know if we've solved anything for Pittsburgh other than laid out a lot of their issues. I've given you something though. I think a double up on this deep-ish quarterback class, intriguing quarterback class. I think that's a way to go. As far as other spots on the roster, I think they've got a starting offensive line. We have to attack receiver. I think the receiver value. I know you like Luther Burden. I think that would be a really nice pick there at 21. I could go that route. I'm going to take the best player available there. It could be receiver. Any of those defensive linemen that we've talked about, depending on who falls, just continue to replenish there. Cornerback opposite Joey Porter Jr. is a big question mark. I think the cornerback depth in the draft is there. I think they could also go the Travarius Ward or DJ Reed route as far as starting corners go. Rasul Douglas, I think, could be a really nice fit in free agency. I would love to see, just a nice cornerback duo, Joey Porter plus someone. So I could see them going free agency or just, going with the way the draft falls in that first round.
And the other position we haven't brought up yet is running back. Like Najee Harris is going to be a free agent. I doubt they're going to want to bring him back. You've got obviously Jalen Warren still there. I don't know if you want him being your only real threat at running back. Cordell Patterson's still theoretically on the roster. His workload, his impact was wildly scaled back. So in a deep running back draft, I think they should be grabbing somebody in the mid rounds to come in.
Yes. Scattaboo.
I did want to bring him up, but I was like, we already mentioned him a ton. But Scattaboo as a Pittsburgh Steeler, the black and blue, or the black and yellow, the black and blue of just cold AFC North winter.
The AFC Central. He's a perfect AFC Central running back.
Right. Which is the black and blue division is the NFC or the AFC North?
I don't know. Could be both of them.
Because I've gotten that wrong before.
Nah, don't worry. We'll just edit it out. Could you imagine?
Yeah, it's the NFC North. So
could you
the
imagine
AFC equivalent of the black and blue division?
Could you imagine Scattaboo running behind Morgan Moses for a team? Could you imagine? Could you imagine the world imploding? Feels like something the Broncos would do. They get all my favorite players. All right, we discussed all the issues that the Steelers have and didn't necessarily solve them, but we maybe gave you some options.
Thanks for watching all the way to the end of our video.
For more great content, click here to subscribe and here to watch another video. We'll see you again soon.